Church of Our Fathers by Roland H. Bainton. Chapter 18, Soldiers of the Pope. And let's see some illustrations there. Catholic reform in the meantime was not lagging, and the Roman Catholic Church was busy correcting many of the faults that had done so much to cause the Protestant Reformation. The efforts of medieval reformers were continued by the new orders of the Roman Catholic Church, founded to rekindle zeal and preserve the vraie foi. These were the words on the banner above, meaning in Old French, the true faith. This was the banner of a Scottish chieftain in the days when Scotland was still Catholic and in league with France. Among the new Catholic orders we shall look at three: the Capuchin, the Jesuit, the Capuchin, I think it's Capuchin, Capuchin, yeah, the Jesuit and the Daughters of Charity. The Capuchins were a new branch of the Franciscans and arose in the year 1528 of the Common Era. Their outward mark was a pointed cap, which they supposed was the kind actually worn by St. Francis. If you trace it back thousands and thousands of years before Christianity, people wrote astronomical and other sorts of information on pointed caps. Their inward mark was to follow in his footsteps, observing his poverty and caring for the poor and sick. When food was scarce, one brother would say to another, "Take it, you need it more than I." The other would reply, "I am young and can go without it more easily." And the food would go uneaten, since neither would have it from the other. When plagues took the people, the Capuchins were the first to volunteer. They also became missionaries. Of the greatest orders in reforming the church, spreading the faith, and winning back lands that had gone over to the Protestants, was the Jesuit, meaning the Order of Jesus. Its founder was a Spanish nobleman, Ignatius Loyola. He had been a knight, fighting for the Queen of Spain against the French. In the siege, a cannonball struck him in the leg and left him upon the walls in a pool of blood. The French, on taking the town, treated him carefully and took him to the Loyola Castle to get well. But the bone was badly set and the leg was not straight. Ignatius had it broken again and reset, and then again a second time. When a piece stuck out, he had it sawed off, and then the leg was too short, and he had it pulled. Nothing would make it right. He could be a soldier no more. As he lay upon his bed, he made up his mind that instead of being a knight of the Queen of Spain, he would become a knight of the Queen of Heaven, the Virgin Mary. Well, whom he thought was the Queen of Heaven. Perhaps there is no Queen of Heaven. Though a grown man, he went to school with the little boys and then to the university, that he might know enough to be a teacher. Yet he did not wait to finish his course before starting at once to teach the people how to improve their lives. The church authorities felt that he might be teaching wrong ideas and had him put in prison. But examination showed that he was all right. From Spain he went to France, and in Paris gathered about him a group of students. He would do so much for them that they could not refuse his wishes. One student to whom Ignatius lent money ran away with it. But a year later, when that student was sick in another town, Ignatius walked over to take care of him. Ignatius taught this little student group to spend time in thinking about themselves, about their wrongdoing, and God's anger and God's love. He made everything plain and simple so that no one could miss it. A plan for self-examination was set forth on 5 fingers. Number 1 is marked, "Give thanks," and shows a figure thanking God as a father. Number 2 is "Ask for light," and shows someone kneeling before the dove, which stands for God's Spirit. Number 3 is "Look at yourself." Here the figure is before whom they say is Christ, with whips of cords. Number 4 is "Be sorry." Number 4 is "Be sorry." The man is kneeling before the altar and looking up at a graven image of Christ upon the cross. Number 5 is "Do something," and shows a knight with a sword about to kill a dragon. This plan is illustrated below, and one of the things, there's the church that I grew up in now has this testimony glove thing where they have the 5 manifold plan to salvation. Choose a knight with a sword to kill a dragon. Okay. But there's no knight with a sword killing a dragon. But anyways, Ignatius Loyola intended to do something and offered his services and those of his followers to the Pope as a new order. They were permitted to form the Society of Jesus and were called the Jesuits. And they were to be teachers of Roman Catholics, converters of Protestants, and missionaries to the non-Christians. The Jesuits knew no fears. When one of them was about to go into Germany to win back the Lutherans, he was told by the Protestants that if he came, he would be drowned in the Rhine. He answered, "It is as short to heaven by water as by land." The Jesuit missionary to India was Francis Xavier. He had been a happy-go-lucky student whom Ignatius Loyola had challenged to a game of billiards on condition that if he lost, he should go through the exercise of self-examination. He lost, and that was the beginning of the change which ended in his going as a missionary to the Portuguese capital in India. Here he found that the navigators had already built churches, gilded cathedrals, which the natives did attend, but afterwards they would go home to worship monkeys and elephants as before. Well, perhaps. Yeah, other things. There were ideas of incarnations as monkeys and elephants, but the Portuguese made no effort to teach them, and were concerned only to build palaces in the midst of huts. Xavier went to the natives. One day he heard of the pearl fishers, who 8 years before had promised to become Christians if the Portuguese would drive off al-Muslimin. This was done, and the promise was kept. The Portuguese were able to report to their kings that 20,000 souls had been saved. Yet a priest had never come near them since. Xavier went barefooted, ringing a bell and calling, "Come, I have good news." Then he went to Japan, and from there his hope was to reach China, but no foreigner was allowed to enter that land. He still hoped that someone would smuggle him in, and wrote to a friend, "If you get to China, you will find me there, either in prison or in Peking." Peking? Xavier, in China. Xavier, with one friend, had himself carried to a deserted island off the coast of Canton, and bargained with a smuggler to take him to the city for 20 hundredweight of pepper. But the smuggler took the pepper and never came back. Xavier sat looking in silence at the great so-called heathen land, waiting to be won for Christ, till death took him before he could find a way to enter. And the fighting people to change their rulers, obviously they were allowed their religion, but we're going to make them all be Christian But it's better to wait for authentic conversion, isn't it? The Daughters of Charity owed their foundation to St. Vincent de Paul. His interest in the poor, in prisoners, slaves, and the sick was awakened when he himself, who had been rich and well, became poor, sick, imprisoned, and enslaved. He was a wealthy young man in France, when one day he set sail from the French port of Marseille. There's not a mark over the E, so I'm guessing you don't say the E, and you only say one. He tells us what happened. So let's see the illustration there. The wind was good, and we could have made Narbonne that day, had not 3 Turkish ships swooped down upon us. In the fight I received an arrow wound, the scar of which I carry to this day. The pirates took our ships, butchered the captain, and put the rest of us in irons. We were taken to Tunis, and in chains were put up for sale as slaves. Merchants came to look us over, as if we were horses or oxen. They made us open our mouths to see our teeth, felt our sides, made us walk, trot, run, carry weights, and fight. Vincent was bought first by a fisherman, who found him no good at sea and sold him again. He came at length into the hands of a Frenchman, who had been a friar of St. Francis, but on being captured had won freedom by giving up his faith. He was now a well-to-do Muslim farmer. Vincent, as his slave, had to till the soil in the broiling sun, The master's wife was interested to find out about the slave's religion and told him to sing the praises of his God. He sang to her from the 137th Psalm, the words of the children of Israel when they were slaves in Babylon. They that carried us away captive required of us a song, and they that wasted us required of us mirth, saying, sing us one of the songs of Zion. How shall we sing the Lord's song in such a strange land? Yahweh, not Lord, Yahweh. God is a noun and verb, increasing existence, but Lord is not really a way that you can translate that. The woman was so moved that she told her husband he had done wrong to give up his faith. His conscience was touched, and with Vincent he planned to escape. 10 months later the chance came, and in a little boat they crossed the sea to France. From that time forward, Vincent decided to spend his life trying to help those in France who were suffering what he had suffered in Tunis. Now, a Muslim knows not to force anybody to believe or not believe anything. The French ships were rowed by galley slaves. John Knox had been one. Vincent sought out the general in charge of the galley and persuaded him to let something be done for the man. For prisoners, too, Vincent was active. Even greater labors were spent on the sick. The hospitals of that day were frightful. Those who were slightly sick were put with those on the point of death. The foul air and filth were enough to kill the most healthy. St. Vincent, and he deserves from now on the title which the Church has given him, enlisted young women to serve as nurses. They did not become regular nuns. They took no vows to spend all their lives at this work. At first, they had no special dress, though now they wear a starched headpiece. They were to live simply, dress plainly, and give all their strength to the sick and poor for as long as they were willing. Your monasteries, the saint told them, are houses of the sick. Your cell, a hired room. Your chapel, the parish church. Your cloister, the streets of the city. Your walled-in dwelling is simply obedience. The gate that guards you is the fear of God. Your veil is modesty. The sisters loved their work and would not give it up for easy living. Once a duchess, hearing of these nurses, desired that one should come to live with her as a companion. When one of the daughters of Charity was asked to go, she answered, I left my father and my mother to serve the poor, and I cannot serve this noble woman. Another daughter was persuaded to go, but was promised that she might come back in 5 days if she wished. The duchess said to her, My child, are you not content to stay with me? Madame, she answered, I left my father's house to serve the poor, and if you were poor, I would gladly stay. At the end of 5 days, she went back into the hospital. Oh, she was back in the hospital. Okay, that's a more understandable way to phrase that. The papacy in our times has become somewhat different from what it was in the Middle Ages. Many of the conflicts of the church and state happened then because the papacy itself was a state, with lands of its own and even with armies of its own. This arrangement was especially bad for Italy because it meant that it could never have one government for the whole country so long as the church was itself a government for part of the country. In the year 1870, Italy was made one nation and all power as the state was taken away from the church. The popes disliked this very much because they said that the head of the church ought not to have to live in the country of any earthly ruler because the church speaks for the heavenly ruler of all men. Well, but is it actually in the position where it speaks its terms? The difficulty was adjusted in 1929 when the Pope was permitted to be ruler of a very small piece of land in Rome called the Vatican City State. It is not big enough to hurt the unity of Italy, but is large enough to remove the Pope from the rulership of any earthly king. The Pope has its own railway station, his own radio from which he can speak to all the world, and his own postage stamp. One of these appears below, showing the Church of St. Peter. Some popes in recent years have pleaded for the peace of the world. Pope Pius the 11th, after the First World War, said that hatred between nations hurts even those who have won a war and makes trouble for the future. We must not forget, said he, that the best way to keep peace is not by a forest of bayonets, but by trust in one another and friendship. and phony theocracy. There's a difference between claiming theocracy and being theocracy. So what is that, in your opinion?